Hi everyone, welcome to today's lecture. Today is lecture 3 of this My Learning mini course 2501. Today we'll be talking about structured interview matrix, also called SIM, to study risk communication. So what is risk communication? It's a crucial part of emergency and disaster risk management, also called health EDRM, and it's also a big part of public health emergency preparedness, PHEP. Generally speaking, risk communication can be defined as an effort to transmit a risk message to an exposed population in such a way as to motivate them to respond appropriately. And the message that is attempted to be communicated is information about the expected type, so good or bad, or magnitude, weak or strong, of an outcome from a behavior or exposure. So, like I mentioned, risk communication is not only a part of disaster management and response to the disaster as it's happening immediately, but it's also a big part of preparedness before the disaster, and it can also help after a disaster. In the recovery phase, so after the immediate crisis, it helps individuals recover from or adjust to something that has already happened. For example, when people are exposed to harmful carcinogens, putting them at risk for cancer, risk communication can give people steps to lower chances of harm from that exposure from cancer, such as screenings. And in the preparedness sense, risk communication can help strengthen community health resilience. And this is important to lowering the chances that the disaster causes health disparities, such that more marginalized populations become vulnerable to disaster impacts when they're not included in the planning phases. Overall, risk communication is important because it helps people make informed health decisions. Now I want to talk about a special qualitative research method that has been used and is effective in investigating risk communication. Structured interview matrix, SIMs, are a type of specialized focus group facilitation technique that are used to engage organizations and citizens in an exercise to spur collaboration, partnership, co-learning, and community building. The SIM facilitation technique was originally developed as a method for organizational analysis and strategic planning, and has now been used widely in research studies and community development to accommodate the voices of a large number of participants, usually more than photo voice, which we saw last week. SIMs also help facilitate engagement through group discussion. One of the reasons SIM has been shown to be successful in facilitating inclusive engagement is because during SIMs, participants assume the role of both the interviewer and the interviewee, in contrast to other types of focus groups where the facilitator has more of an active role. And this is a diagram of the SIMS process. Again, it's a special type of focus group, and this slide might not make sense at first glance, but I promise when you actually conduct SIMS, it's actually really comprehensive and straightforward. I've participated in SIMS before. I've also facilitated SIMS. I promise it's actually really straightforward. So SIMS basically employs a graded approach to group collaboration and discussion as it involves 3 processes. In the first step, the researchers pair participants with one other participant, so the group is split into one-on-one groups. These 2 individuals interview each other using a prompt or question provided beforehand by the researchers. So they're talking with each other, they're engaging, one of them is asking the other questions. One of these 2 individuals acts as the interviewer, like I mentioned, for about 5 minutes, but this can vary. Then the researchers switch up the pairs, so each person is paired with a different person. And if you were the interviewer in the first pairing, you are now the interviewee, and vice versa. This process is repeated anywhere from 2 to 4 times. The second part of SIMS is called the small group deliberation stage. Here, researchers assign participants randomly to small groups consisting of 4 to 8 people. And during these sessions, all the participants talk about the answers to the questions that they asked in the previous one-on-one sessions. Basically, people talk about what they had heard, if there were themes in what they heard, their thoughts and on what people had responded to the questions. And then they come to a consensus on three main themes or the three main things that they were hearing during the one-on-one interviews. Finally, the third part of SIMS is a discussion with the whole group. So the researchers take all the participants who were previously with the other 4 to 8 people, bring them back into the main room if it's conducted in person. So once everyone's in the main room, then each of those small groups presents the top 3 themes that were decided upon in the last step. During this step, all people are invited to comment on these themes or engage in further deliberation. Keep in mind that the top 3 themes of each of the small groups can vary, and that is encouraged and that is expected. And that's what facilitates this type of engaging conversation between folks. So this is essentially the SIMS process. And when you participate in a SIMS, if you ever get a chance to, it is very comprehensive when you participate, but I understand that this slide might make it seem more convoluted than it is. So how has the SIMS method been used in disaster research? SIMS as a qualitative research method has been spearheaded by several leaders in disaster risk reduction research, including Dr. O'Sullivan's team at the University of Ottawa. In their 2014 paper, they really set the foundation for how SIMS can be an effective technique to enhance connectedness, common ground, collaborative action, and awareness of existing services and supports in each community. Using this technique has been shown to help communities build health resilience and an enhanced adaptive crisis response and recovery. This team, led by Dr. O'Sullivan, had demonstrated how SIM sessions were the first step in a larger upstream community intervention to map assets and enhance collaborative practice for disaster management. They talked about how SIMS can be done with stakeholders in disaster management, including professionals and volunteers from emergency management, health and social services, community organizations, and citizens themselves who represent high-risk populations. And you will see an example of this in the case example I'll talk about later. Like I discussed in the photo voice session from one of the previous lectures, I also want to point out why SIMS is unique in comparison to other techniques and other methods. So an important element of the networking provided in the SIM sessions is the participant mix. In disaster research, SIM recruitment emphasizes inclusion of citizens, associations, policymakers, service providers, and volunteer groups whose voices are often left out of community disaster preparedness activities. And in doing so, by inviting these voices and these perspectives, SIMS provides opportunities for new relations to be established and recognition of assets available within the social community outside traditional response organizations. Now, going back to risk communication, I want to provide a case example for when SIMS was used to investigate risk communication and build community health resilience. This study was done by Khan et al. In 2019, and it's entitled Retiring the Flip Phones, Exploring Social Media Use for Managing Public Health Incidents. I'll give a bit of background on this study to provide context for their investigation and choice to use SIMS methodology. Basically, a specific medium for crisis and risk communication has been recognized as social media. In recent years and recent disasters, social media has gained popularity as a communication tool in the public sphere because a large portion of the population gets their risk and crisis communication through social media these days. And there has been a lot of research on how social media can be best adopted to contribute to routine practice during emergency response. An example is when it was adopted during the May 2017 floods in Ottawa and Gatineau. Some of you might remember, but Public Health had used Twitter, their handle is Ottawa Health, to share messages around well water testing, preparedness activities, and mental health support for certain populations. Given this, the objective of the current study by Khan et al. Was to explore barriers and practice-relevant gaps experienced by local public health professionals in using social media for risk communication. And by understanding this knowledge may inform strategies for how social media can be leveraged in the management of emergency public health incidents. Since there was limited topic on this evidence on this topic, Since there was limited evidence on this particular topic, the researchers chose an exploratory qualitative design applying the SIM facilitation technique. The use of SIMs allowed them to incorporate varied experiences of using social media across disciplines within public health agencies. Since I mentioned SIMs can accommodate a large sample size, a large variety of experiences, and diversity in research participants, this research team found success when using the SIMS method. And in the study on risk communication through social media, focus groups were held with a diverse group of professionals from local public health agencies across Ontario. The sample consisted of 36 of these individuals and stakeholders. And the researchers purposefully sought representations from participants from different geographic locations in order to capture differences in the participant experiences. An inductive approach to content analysis was used to identify 6 emergent themes. In this picture, you'll see some of the focus group questions that they had given to the participants. Each SIMS lasted around 2.5 hours, 2.5 hours. As mentioned, the SIMS in this study yielded 6 themes in social media's contribution to emergency response practice. 3 of these themes pertain to social media's contribution to emergency practice, and 3 themes pertain to barriers to social media as a risk communication practice. And I will talk about the first 3 here. The predominant contribution to emergency communication that social media has was that it could reach a large portion of the population to disseminate information of the incidences. It could expand the reach of risk communication to traditionally hard to reach populations, including youth, Indigenous people, LGBT plus people, temporary residents. And sharing information through social media was referred to a passive form of communication, where public health agencies could push out messages to create awareness or change behaviors. And this is an example of one-way sharing. The second theme was that social media could also move beyond passive communication to engage in two-way dialogue between agencies and the public. And this is valuable during disasters because prior to social media, agencies predominantly function unidirectionally, pushing out information with little interaction with their audience. Now, many public health agencies have a presence on social media, like in the example of Ottawa Health during the floods, and they've established a credible space for getting information out on resources. The third contribution they found social media to have for risk communication was that social media could help identify unrecognized issues and inform public health actions. It allowed public health agencies to understand public perceptions, identify gaps in response, and this was mainly because social media was a measure of engagement through the ability to see click-throughs, followers, shares, likes, comments, those kind of things. The next 3 themes the SIMS yielded were related to barriers to social media as a risk communication practice. So although social media was found to contribute to risk communication, there were barriers to social media engagement. Firstly, a barrier to its adoption is that public health agencies have a perception that using social media is a loss of control. Like I mentioned, social media is a way of two-way dialogue, and in some cases, public health agencies want to control the message, and they don't want to have two-way dialogue. Sometimes public health agencies are afraid of the potential for mistakes because social media risk communication can be put out so fast. And it's embarrassing for them to have to redact something if the first message that was put out was wrong or needs to be updated, because this causes a lack of credibility. Another barrier to adopting social media is the lack of trust within public health agencies. Trust here refers to leadership putting trust in the staff or departments to put out accurate information so that people will listen to the message. But this trust is associated with challenges with the approval process, and this can impact timelines and risk the communication going on without public help. The final barrier is the agency's own structure and capacity, which sometimes lacks clarity on whose role it is to respond. For example, some public health agencies are within a municipality, and the resources for communication or social media are housed under the structure. Another aspect of organizational structure is the human resources dedicated to managing social media platforms on a continual basis. So, whose responsibility is it for this time and funding to train and analyze and interpret data from social media? That's the end of my slideshow. That's the end of the content of this week. Make sure to do your readings, and I'll see you next week.